good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome. A literally very warm welcome to CBI at 10 today. What a glorious bank holiday weekend we enjoyed, and the weather looks like it's going to hold till this weekend too. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you to our amazing panel for being here. We are going to be talking this morning about the path to net zero and COP26 and all of that good stuff. But before we dive into that, because we've got a packed agenda of things I want to get through, I'm going to come straight to John, who is Director of Policy and Comms at CBI. We all know him. Hiya, John. What do we need to know this week about COVID?
Morning, Liz. Yeah, listen, so just two really quick bits to update from my side. So first of all, just going to start with the important but sombre anniversary last week, 1 year on since the murder of George Floyd. Now, incredibly difficult time, we know, for many, particularly colleagues from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds. You might remember, Liz, last year the CBI hosted a short mini-series. We explored some of the issues and how firms can help, tackled things like pay gap reporting, recruitment, development policies, that kind of piece. Now, last week we looked at 1 year on what we've learned, what firms are doing and what further steps businesses can take. We had an absolutely brilliant webinar, I think, with Lord Simon Woolley. Great discussion. There is a recording on the website. I would really encourage colleagues to take a listen back on catch up. I'm sure Alice will pop it in the chat. On COVID, Liz. So listen, we're approaching stage 4 of the Prime Minister's roadmap. 21st of June, as many people be aware, just 3 weeks away. Now, the Indian variant has caused concern, particularly with growing transmission in certain parts of the country. But the vaccine juggernaut rolls on, and we had, I should say, what felt like a really significant moment yesterday when the UK recorded 0 COVID deaths. So fingers crossed. But listen, the areas where firms are looking for real clarity remain the same. These are the things we've spoken about, and I'll kind of pick them off, Liz, in sort of ascending order of priority really quickly. So first and foremost, around COVID status certifications. Now, we know that firms are making investment decisions right now, but they're doing so slightly in the dark around this. Now, from the CBI's perspective, we've said, yep, there could be a case for them in a domestic setting. They should be introduced voluntarily, and they need to be supplied with really clear guidance for firms. But hopefully we'll get a bit of clarity from government in the coming weeks on this one. Second area is just we're looking at a series of cliff edges emerging in June, which I think for many reasons is going to be a really critical moment in the economy. So firstly, around testing. We've spoken about this before, Liz. The funding for workplace testing from government runs out at the end of June. Now, I think it's pretty unlikely that workplace testing isn't going to be part of most business strategies, maybe for the rest of the year. So that's potentially a bit of a resource pinch and not a great moment for firms. Second area is the end of the trade credit insurance guarantee. Now, our COVID inbox has picked up sort of widespread reports of coverage being withdrawn at the end of June following the completion of the government's guarantee. Now, this is something that we are discussing right now with officials, so hopefully we'll have a bit of an update in the days and weeks to come. And then the final sort of June moment, if you like, is commercial rent protections, which are due to end on the 30th of June. Now, this has been well reported. And I think there are two issues at play here, Liz. First and foremost, there are those firms that really do need extra breathing space, those firms that haven't been able to trade their way to recovery. But there's also a question around equity and fairness about the firms that have paid their rents throughout this process, but also for the landlords that we've spoken to that haven't been able to get any rent since January from their clients, even though some retailers have been able to be open to customers throughout that entire period. So kind of double-edged sword. Final bit for me, Liz, on COVID is social distancing and the review. This is the most totemic cross-economy impact. And we know that Michael Gove is looking at things like the working from home requirement, the 1 metre rule, COVID secure guidance. Now, this is going to have a direct impact on firms' costs, on your operating capacity and your people. So on cost, we know it has a direct financial impact on firms. On operating capacity, we know that's been reduced by about 20% across the economy compared to pre-pandemic norms. And for people, we know that social distancing has had such an acute impact on people's mental health and well-being. So I think all things as they stand, Liz, incredibly difficult right now for firms to prepare and invest without knowing what future business environment looks like. Now, I think the government is right to focus on data, not dates, but firms really need clarity in the coming days to help them prepare. And that's going to be a really big area of focus for our government engagement this week. And no doubt, Liz, something that we'll return to in the build up to the 21st of June.
Exactly. Fingers crossed all around, I think, John. Thank you very much. Just give us a quick overview before I come to Andrew Griffith in a sec on the net zero position. Where's the CBI at with this? Why are we talking about it today in particular?
Yeah, of course. I mean, listen, Liz, the other thing I didn't mention, excuse me, in the kind of introduction was last week we had our launch of the Seize the Moment work. And in this, we identified sort of 6 business-led growth opportunities for the economy. And one of those is around the opportunity to create a decarbonised economy. Now, our research, our analysis offered some really clear prizes here. So the opportunity for firms to create new jobs, 240,000 net new jobs. The sector plays that the UK can make in industries like hydrogen, electric battery manufacturing, that kind of piece. And actually the ability for the UK to be a world leader in the transfer of knowledge. So our industries are world leading, but the skills and knowledge required to deliver them can also be. Now, there is a sense, Liz, of real change in the horizon here. So colleagues will be aware China and the US announced a commitment to work together back in April. That feels really significant. Now, at the same time, the UK is obviously hosting the G7 summit taking place next week in beautiful Cornwall. We have COP26 in Glasgow later this year. So there's a real moment, we think, for the government and industry to demonstrate global leadership on climate and environmental policy. And all businesses, small and large, can play a really important role on the UK's journey to net zero as an economy. So just to finish, Liz, on what I think the CBI's role is in all of this. So first and foremost, it's got to be to help businesses to mobilise to act. So we're backing the UN's Race to Zero campaign. So this encourages all companies that can to set science-based targets for emissions reductions. Look forward to hearing what Andrew has to say in particular on that. And alongside that, the Goal 13 Impact Platform. This is a partnership between the CBI, Deloitte and others, and it aims to kind of really shine a light on the ambitions and drivers of corporate action. I'm sure Alice will be able to post a link in the chat. But I think what comes next requires really significant change, Liz, for consumers and businesses alike. So our second objective is to work with government and industry on the rapid development and scale up of emerging tech, new funding and finance models, and those really important delivery mechanisms to put in place the infrastructure to kind of enable that transition. So final thing for me to say, Liz, is just to give a plug really. So the CBI has our Road to Net Zero conference on the 14th and 15th of June. So once you've finished listening to this webinar, you've made yourself a cup of tea, as you say, Liz, please do head over to the website and sign up. It's going to be a great couple of days, lots of great speakers, top tips, lots of inspiration. Really encourage you all to take a look. I'm sure, again, Alice will just post a link in the chat.
Brilliant. We're keeping Alice busy this morning. We've heard Seize the Moment, we've got Raise the Zero campaign, and obviously then there's the conference too. Thanks very much, John. I'm going to come now, if I can, to Andrew Griffith, who is, I hope, wearing his cape from his UK Net Zero Business Champion official designated role. Thanks very much for being here, Andrew. So let's start with Together for Our Planet, a scheme you announced last week. Just tell us what that is and what it means for people.
It's good morning, Liz. It's a brilliant campaign that takes a lot of the action that we just heard about from John, things like the Race to Zero campaign, that started with a lot of big companies. So, you know, those companies that have had corporate sustainability officers that have been engaged in this. It takes that same campaign and takes it out to the 6 million smaller businesses across the United Kingdom. They make up around 99% by volume and about 60% by employees. So together, that's a really big domain, really important. Lots of small practical steps that they can take that compound up into a big difference. And so that's what that's about, getting people to make a pledge in the next 25 or so weeks until that UN climate summit.
And what are the sorts of things that people can do? What are your expectations of businesses who would sort of qualify, if you like, to be part of that campaign?
You've got to get on board with the idea we're going to be net zero by 2050. That's after all the government target. That's ambitious at country level, but I've yet to find a small business that can't make that. There's a long time to adapt and change. And if we all move together, the costs and the speed of transition is that much greater. And what it boils down to are simple, small steps, often those that eliminate waste. So perhaps shortening your supply chain so things aren't traveling so far to get to you. You know, my favorite, the one I'm guilty of, is turning off your computers at night, switching off your LED, substituting for renewable energy from your supplier. Very easy to, you can do that now with a few mouse clicks, and it generally doesn't cost you any more, or resolving when you next change your vehicle, if you work from a vehicle or if you've got vehicles, to make the next ones of those a commercial electric vehicle, because they're coming on stream now. So they're very simple steps that individuals can take, small businesses can take, but they compound up to making a big difference.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. I wonder, this is something that I've tried to get my head around, but I'm afraid of singularly failing. As a journalist, I probably shouldn't say that in public, but how does the kind of milestone of COP26...
Say that very often in public, and get all of your colleagues in journalism to do the same. We're all fallible, right?
But I just wonder, how does the COP26 milestone in November tie into what's happening next week in Cornwall with the G7? Is there a sort of bridge between those two things?
There is an absolute bridge, or maybe it's even a sort of rolling thunder, because each week by week, the UK in particular, wearing, as the secretariat for this big UN initiative, this incredibly important moment that Kerry's called, the world's last best chance to save the planet. So it's incredibly important. Every forum, whether it's the G7 in Cornwall, great opportunity for UK leadership, the G20, led by Italy, who are our co-hosts of the Global Climate Summit. There's actually a COP on biodiversity in China between now and November. And each and every week that our Prime Minister and our leaders meet their counterparts from around the world, whether it's the G7 finance leaders meeting, which is happening right now. So all of that is a constant and hopefully growing crescendo that leads to this moment in time in Glasgow, where world leaders make the pledges that they need to make in combination that add up to no more than 1.5 degrees of warming. So significant reductions. The UK's promised to reduce our carbon emissions by 78% by 2035. If everybody on the planet got anywhere near that, we would be doing enough to save our wonderful, precious, and importantly, only habitable planet. So that's what that's all about. But to link that back to what each and every business can do, by making our own pledges, and thousands already have, 40% of the FTSE 100 companies have already made that race to zero science-based target pledge. By doing that, we are inspiring action from around the world. This is a global race. And so for every pledge that we happen to make in the UK, which is a relatively small part, as we know, of global emissions, we are inspiring action across the whole world in that race. So they really do lever up. And by small businesses making that pledge, again, the millions of small businesses will inspire us all to make the changes that we need to, including as consumers, because small businesses are both agile, but they also have really deep relationships with customers. That's not to take away from brilliant businesses like Adnams, and the power of brands is really important in this space. But those small businesses really do have a role to play.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Andrew. And I do think, like you say, the feeling that it is possible with manageable adjustments, I think, is a really important message for ordinary people, whether they're business leaders or not to hear. I'm going to come to Marta next, if I can. Good morning, Marta. You're Global Head of Sustainable Outcomes at Aviva. Aviva, obviously, massive insurance company. What were you, and you were, I think, the first major insurer to declare a 2040 net zero target, so 10 years kind of ahead of the game, if you like. What does that mean? If you're Aviva, what does it mean in practice to be, what sorts of ways are you changing your business to hit that, accelerated net zero goal?
Yeah, thank you, Liz, and hi everyone, and thanks for watching. I mean, making a net zero pledge for 2040 is hugely ambitious. It's the biggest ever target that we have set ourselves as a business, the most ambitious one. And the reason for that is, we're UK's largest insurance company. We have a huge responsibility to our people, to our customers, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you have a life insurance or a pension with a company like Aviva if there is no planet to live on, to retire into. And so this is not just a sort of nice, fluffy thing to do for us. This is of strategic importance our business. So we have made it, but we very much recognize that it feels like a very, I mean, I'm a Norwegian, and we climb mountains on our spare time, no pubs involved, just going to the mountain. And it feels like a very big mountain to climb. But what we're doing is a couple of things to try and make it a bit more easy to get your hands around. And so I'll maybe flag some of them. One of them is setting some initial milestones. And so we're not sort of looking only to 2050. We've set some milestones around what we're going to do by 2025 and 2030. And that meant, doing a lot of work inside the business, asking various parts of the business, what can we do in the next year, in the next 12 to 18, 24 months, in the next 5 years to really move the dial. So one of those things that we're doing by 2025 is reducing the carbon intensity of all of our investments by 25%. And then by 2030, we're going to continue that reduction and reducing the carbon intensity of our investments by 60%. So, it's a bit like any plan, really. Have some initial milestones that feels a little bit more tangible that you can try and target. The second thing we're doing is making sure that we don't just focus on what we are going to stop doing. Because there can be a lot of doom and gloom in climate change debates. It all sounds, and it is very, worrying what's happening around us. But we need to kind of be optimistic about all the things we can, the exciting things we can do. Things like, change and be better at providing insurance cover for electric vehicles for people. Things like providing, one of our goals, which I think is very exciting, sitting inside the investment business, is we want 20% of all the flows that comes into our business from customers, whether you have a pension or a savings account with Aviva, 20% of that should go towards climate aligned or sustainable impact funds. And that is all about creating exciting new products and inspiring people to have a sort of positive discussion. And maybe the final piece is all about doing what we can do, both ourselves, but also with our suppliers. So our target is not just for our own operations and our investments, it's also for our suppliers. And there's a big job for us to do as a big corporate to try and encourage and partner with the right kind of suppliers. So, if you're a supplier out there and are thinking about becoming green, there'll be demand for greener versions of everything that we buy in. And so that's hopefully some of the examples of how we're trying to make some steps to hit that net zero by 2040.
Thank you so much, Marta. I'm going to ask a follow-up question about the letter that Aviva was a co-signatory on recently, went to the Prime Minister and alongside other big financial institutions, talking about a net zero financial system. Just help me to understand what that is and what would the UK government need to do to help us get that?
So put simply, the net zero financial system is a financial system that's aligned to the Paris Agreement, that that gets to net zero in the same way that every other business is going to get to net zero. And I think maybe a fact that can show us how far away we are from that is if you look at the current financial markets, and in particular, the FTSE 100, we're burning the planet at roughly 3.8 degrees. So that means that the financial system today is investing in a way that doesn't actually take climate change into account. So what we need is for in a net zero financial system, that means that every player in the financial system, and it can sometimes be quite a complicated system, but that means insurers, banks, asset managers, the people who advise, financial advisors, everyone in the chain of how money goes through the system needs to be aligned to net zero. And that, practically means a couple of things that we've asked the government to do. In the letter, we've asked the government to set that ambition, because having that clarity for the financial system, I think if every financial player in the UK and ideally the world knew that that's what we're aiming for, then we will get a lot more financial institutions, getting on board with the net zero pledge. We've also suggested that in the UK, we create a task force to have a better policy dialogue, because, it's not always that the regulations are helping us to act in the right way. There's still, for example, some pension funds can't actually invest as much in green activities that they would like to because of some regulatory barriers. So we need to look at the political landscape and change the rules of the game so that the game can become net zero. And finally, as Andrew was talking about earlier, we would like the UK to continue to drive forward international action, because Britain can't do this on their own. We need every single country in the world to go on to have the same mindset when it comes to finance, because the financial system is a global one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Marta. I will come back to you in a second, but I'm going to come now to Andy Wood, if I can, Chief Executive Adnam's beautiful, glorious Suffolk Coast today. Lovely to see you, Andy. Thank you for being here. I was surprised when I read my briefer this morning that the brewing industry is a relatively high emissions sector, and I'm not sure I would necessarily have guessed that. Just tell us a little bit about why it would be that you would be considered a relatively high emissions under normal circumstances.
Well, morning everybody. It's great to be here. I think we would be considered relatively high emissions because we're boiling a lot of water from cold as part of the process. So it's something that we addressed a number of years ago, and different from Aviva, we're a sort of mid-size UK business, largely family owned, but we have a public listing as well. And you know, why did we sort of decide to provide this early leadership in this space is because we are perched here on the edge of the UK, and when a North Sea surge coincides with a spring tide, many of our pubs get flooded. Some of the very nice beach huts on Southwold seafront get washed away. We kind of live with the elements every day. So that's been the important driver for us over a number of years. And we started investing in this technology in the mid-2000s. So the first thing was our distribution centre that we built 7 meters down in a disused gravel workings to avoid you know, a blot on the landscape, but we made it out of lime hemp block. We put sedum on the roof. It has solar panels. It recycles rainwater, and importantly, the thermal properties that being 7 meters down and being made out of lime hemp block means that we don't have to use any artificial heating or cooling to keep our product at an optimal temperature. So we put the roof on that building when it was 31 degrees in July 2006. And subject to our staff coming in and getting the temperature down by opening airlock doors at night, it has remained between 13 and 15 degrees since the day we opened it. Wow. And we've had no artificial heating or no artificial cooling for that. And that was using technology that humanity knew years and years ago. So that's a really consideration. Then we decided to renew our brew house and water usage. Because East Anglia is the lowest lying and driest part of the UK, actually water usage came up high on our agenda. So we use heat retention. So if you go to a brewing town, you'll see steam coming out of chimneys and you'll get that lovely smell of hops in the town. But that's energy being vented to the atmosphere. We keep a lid on that, retain all that heat in a heat retention tank, and use that to brew the next brew that's coming through. So our water usage is 3.1 pints of water used to make a pint of beer. The worst offending in the breweries in the world can use 11 to 15, maybe 20 pints of water. So these are important natural resources that we need to conserve, and that's the reason we've been, you know, engaged in this agenda for a long, long time. And a decade ago, the beer, wines and spirits director at one of our biggest customers, a UK supermarket, wanted to work with us to track carbon emissions all along the supply chain in beer. We did that work, and it absolutely transformed our relationship with that supermarket. So there's commercial opportunity in this. It isn't, oh, we've got to do this and it's going to cost us more. It may cost you a bit of investment, but there's commercial opportunity in this as well, Liz.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was going to ask you, all the amazing, you've obviously had to surround yourself with clever scientists and engineers, and people know how to construct this, you know, kit. and it doesn't sound like it's an inexpensive exercise to kind of put in place something that is going to really last. So when you're making those kinds of decisions as a CEO, how do you weigh up the benefit to both to the commercial opportunity and obviously to the planet against this is a big amount of money? You know, how do you make those kinds of decisions?
Well, our financial ownership, given that we're largely family owned and it's more than one family, but we also have a public listing, means that we can work over the long term. And I think one of the impediments to this is the short-termism that exists in our system at the moment, and we need to address that. Then it's one of communication, and it's being clear about what the purpose of business is. And ours is to provide long-term sustainable returns to our shareholders, but also to other stakeholders. And then it's about a communication of what are your values as an organization? How are you going to bring that purpose to life? So it's very much for the CEO, I think, a communications exercise. But you're absolutely right. We need to surround ourselves with experts. Fortunately, on our patch with the University of East Anglia, we have a world-leading School of Environmental Sciences, so we engage with them. But we also engage with Imperial, who bring their students here every year to see the work that we've done. And we also engage with Cranfield. So actually, someone mentioned earlier about knowledge transfer. There's a knowledge transfer out of academia into business that needs to take place. But business should not be hesitant about sharing its learnings with academia as well, because we're all in this one together. And one of the things that I hope we see is public, private, third sector working together to all achieve the same goals, which is net zero 2050.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point about the sharing of the knowledge across the different sectors, because they're not always very good at talking to one another. Marta, if I come back to you, obviously the shape of Aviva is a really different kind of organisation from what Andy is dealing with his company. The activities you do on a day-to-day basis, you're obviously many, many more people. And you mentioned when you we're talking before about how you came up with your kind of target of 2040 and what that meant for you as an organisation. So you have a real plan, that you had to go and talk to everybody in the business to kind of understand what they were dealing with and kind of get a sense of priorities and things. So I guess my question is, if there are people watching the webinar this morning who are thinking, I don't think I've really started this yet, I think I need to get going or certainly accelerate, what is your advice to those people? Where do they begin to sort of identify their priorities as an organisation and indeed their opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, don't expect that it should be easy. It's probably the first point, but that it's sort of it's a worthwhile task doing. And as Andrew was saying, we only have one planet. Maybe kind of coming back to the mountain climbing, and Andy, let's get some more, you know, brewed beer up in the Norwegian mountain at some point. But I think if we go back to that, I think there's three things you do when you're trying to climb a mountain. The first thing is know your own skills, and like basically understand yourself, understand your business, understand how you have a negative or a positive impact and where you can make changes. And it's similar to kind of know, okay, I can climb that mountain or this one. You need to sort of know where you're heading and set that target. But a key part of that is awareness. So understand yourself and understand the impact you're having. And that means some analysis, like Andy was talking about, looking at the carbon emission of the supply chain. And there are plenty of tools out there that can help you get that awareness. I think the second thing is not being afraid to take action. Another sort of advice when we go hiking is that you should always prepare for different changing weather. All of a sudden it'll rain, or you know, it'll start snowing and you might have to dig yourself under in a tent. You know, make sure you pack for adverse changes and different kind of weather. This is not going to be a sort of straight line. I talked about our carbon reduction. It's not going to go like this perfectly smooth. It's going to be a sort of bumpy ride. And so be prepared to be a bit more agile, to learn, to not be scared of failing, and just sort of start trying, and you know, be very clear about how you're getting better. But yeah, don't let you know, the myriad of metrics and the difficulty of these decisions make you scared of taking action. I think it was great to hear from Andy how he's kind of, you know, you weigh it up, but at the end of the day, you take some action and you start progressing, and then you'll learn from that. And finally, on accountability, I think, you know, both Andrew has talked about how we communicate and bring all our stakeholders with us. It's so important to communicate and, you know, hold yourself accountable, whether that is, you know, exploring whether part of the pay of your top leadership should be linked to climate goals, whether it's you know, if that works for your business, whether it's making sure that you disclose your progress and your targets regularly to your stakeholders, or something I'm very passionate about, how you excite your customers. Because, you know, one way of making this a commercial opportunity is making the end consumer on the street realize that they can, you know, get the good products but also tackle climate change at the same time. You know, in my view, thinking about where your pension is going is such an important thing, probably more important than going vegan or trying to skip the car. So think of, you know, how we encourage consumers to make those choices will be a very essential part of the journey. So hopefully a bit of awareness, a bit of action, and a bit of accountability might be a good little formula to use, and then you'll get up that mountain, I'm sure.
Andy, I could see you nodding. Awareness, action, accountability. Is there anything you'd add to that? It doesn't have to begin with an A.
No pressure then, no pressure. No, I think you do have to start somewhere as well. And, you know, taking Marta's mountain climbing analogy, every mountain is climbed one step at a time. So I think it's very important to take individual steps. So it may seem small and insignificant, but it's a step in the right direction. So I think that's important to remember on that one. You've got to start.
So much. There's a question that's come in actually from somebody watching that I think I might try Andrew with this one. And if Andrew doesn't fancy it, you feel free to bat it over to John. Stand by, John. From Peter Buchanan, talking about his business. We have a fleet of all electric cars, but have not managed to secure contracts from large companies who sort of, he's identifying a sort of dissonance between what large companies say and then what they actually do when it comes down to it. Can I get the contract? And the question is, what incentives do you think there are to encourage large companies to decarbonize their supply chains? If you're part of a supply chain and you're ready to go with your electric fleet, but somehow it's not kind of, you know, flushing through in the way that you'd like it to, do you think that incentives is the right sort of framing for that?
Yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more. There are incentives out there. You know, the total cost, I'm told the total cost of ownership now of an electric vehicle has reached at least parity, and it will continue as they scale. It will continue to reduce over time. There are a lot of incentives around the charging point, which is the current, you know, if there's a constraining factor at all, I think it's currently the speed with which we can roll out the charging network. Partly that's skills, so it's not just throwing money at it, it's actually bringing on board, you know, new careers, new opportunities for people. But I have to say, all I hear is that everyone is engaged with this. So I mean, I'm conscious, you know, one's not in a bubble, but with that 40% of the FTSE 100 having signed up to, you know, that reasonably stretching science-based target, I suspect what you're going to see is that move through the snake. So, you know, it starts with the senior pledge, the finance community, as we've heard, are doing great work. And again, that's something that's going to see more and more businesses engage. And then they'll be looking to see how that can move down the supply chain. So that's actually one of the areas where I thought things are making good progress. There are others in terms of the built environment where things take a little bit longer, and some of the technology solutions are not yet ready for prime time as they are now in automotive.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks ever so much, Sandra. I mean, the net zero in the construction industry in general, I think, is a really fascinating and rapidly developing area. Question here from Marta, from somebody watching, from Jamie Black, which is a good question. It's a simple one, really. If I were to drive, I don't, but if I were to drive a diesel Land Rover, will there come a time when Aviva won't insure me for driving that vehicle because its carbon intensity, is that the intensiveness, is counter to your kind of net zero targets?
That's a good question, and as I'm not in the insurance part of the business, I'm gonna not promise anything. I think it's maybe kind of coming back to one of the words which is important to me, it's about transition and about not just thinking about what we're not going to do. So my hope, I guess, is to whoever is driving a Land Rover, is that over time, over the next sort of decade or 2 decades, you know, we've still got a big amount we need to do over the next 10 years, but and then even more to do over the next 20 is there'll be different incentives to try and change both behaviors and maybe change the car at some point. But and Aviva needs to think about what we do as an insurance company. But for me, it's important about how we help people transition, and not immediately how we kind of have a stick at the end of the road. But maybe using an analogy from investments, where we have launched a very big engagement campaign that we call the climate engagement and escalation program. What we're doing there is recognizing that a lot of the, you know, big emitters today, you know, we could walk away from them and divest, but actually what we've done instead is we've said we're going to engage with these companies, talk to the senior management, you know, big companies in the UK like BP and others, talk to the senior management and encourage them and show them that we are willing to still be invested in them if they can be part of that journey, if they can set real science-based target, if they are willing to get on that journey. We will continue to invest. There is a stick at the end of the journey, and we've given some of the companies different, you know, a time period. There's a deadline at the end. There's a looming divestment if they don't change. But we do think it's important to transition. So I can't guarantee the insurance part. But what I will say is, you know, as a company, we need to help customers transition in any way. So hopefully, maybe it's more about, you know, encouraging the switch and making it more appetizing to insuring electric vehicles, for example. But yeah, I'd leave that for my insurance colleagues to answer.
Thank you, Marta. Andy, just as we come into the last few minutes or so, I'm just noting actually a comment from a chap called Anthony Goodger, who works in meat production and has been particularly interested in what you've had to say. Obviously, the meat production industry is under a lot of pressure, and he's part of a net zero initiative that is Association of Independent Meat Suppliers. I just want to note what he'd had to say. Do you have the sort of support and the guidance and the incentives, I suppose, and information that you need as a member of the brewing industry, I guess from external sources? I presume that the question is about government sources, to sort of help keep going with this. Do you think there's a sufficient sort of scaffolding around you to keep you all progressing in the way that you need to progress?
I think that scaffolding is still being built. There is a scaffolding around us. Our industry bodies are all signed up to this agenda, and that's great. And the brewing industry is about conviviality and conversation. You know, what do you do when you're in a pub? So, you know, we do all talk to one another. So yes, we feel we do. However, we have taken the step of finding some of the brightest minds in the land around this at universities and talk to them about what we could be doing as well. That's really important. The other thing is, and building on Marta's points really, and it links into the Land Rover conversation, is the more businesses do this, the more our customers are demanding it. Yeah. So we're certainly seeing it from our customers who are demanding more from us in this space. And I think that's a wholly positive thing. And that gives us great encouragement to keep on with this journey. I always want to go up to anyone I see in a pub, you know, drinking a pint of Adnams and say, why did you order that? But it's would be a bit scary if an old bloke going up to people and asking, why did you order that beer? But there is a good consumer push in this area as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's chicken and egg in a good way, I guess. It's sort of perpetuating chicken and egg. And in particular for yourself, and I'll come back to Marta in a second, when you think about COP26, it's an important milestone, and Andrew helpfully sort of spelt out the links between lots of other milestones in the lead up to it. But we're very focused on what's going to happen in Glasgow in November, not least because it's on our doorstep, I guess. What would you be looking for from as an outcome for that? How will we know when it's all over and they're packing up the chairs and putting away the conference centre? How will we know that it's been worth it? It's delivered what we want it to?
Well, I think we want to see, following on from what will be a lot of rhetoric that comes out, some tangible actions, and those can be actions on a global scale, but also on a local scale. And I think it's the local thing, and it's the small steps that's really matters. I would also like the discussion, as Marta was saying, about transition to come further up the agenda and start talking about how government and policymakers can help businesses transition from point A to point B, because that's not going to be easy. And some people are coming to this journey later than others. So we need to be cognizant of that, and we need to support people and encourage people. And it shouldn't be about don't do this and don't do that. It should be, what if you did this?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Andrew, just a final word from you. You mentioned a number of initiatives and ways that business people can get involved. Beyond signing up to the Race to Zero campaign, obviously we've mentioned Together for Our Planet. What if somebody was going to leave this webinar now and think, okay, today's the day, I'm going to make a start? What are the things that they should be thinking about doing?
Well, those are two really good starts, to be clear. So, you know, the first thing is you know, every journey starts with a single step, and the single step in this case is to make one of those pledges, or whatever pledge you can make, but not do nothing. That's probably terrible grammar. The other thing is, look, businesses every day are coming up with terrific innovation. So, you know, that may be a process improvement. It may be inventing some new form of fuel or some wacky method of transport that's going to save carbon. You know, more likely it's rooting out a particular production process or a supplier. In that space, we're not competitors, right? We're all living in the same planet, and therefore talking about that, showing that, elevating that is a fantastic way to drive the adoption curve faster, so that we can all make the change quicker. So it's not a million miles different from what Marta was saying with the 3 A's. It's, you know, it is about acting first, and then I always add show or tell. So that's a big part of what business can do. And business is at the heart. When those chairs are cleared away, if in a successful outcome, we have made those pledges, our world leaders have made the commitments and surfaced the choices to the populations, but it's going to be business who are going to be picking up that very tractable problem and driving through the small changes that are going to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very, very much to everybody for joining us this morning. It's been completely fascinating to hear about how different types of organisations are chipping away at this really big challenge. And we've heard some really good practical beginning steps for people who want to either get started or go faster. So my sincere thanks to Andy Wood, to Marta Borhag, to Andrew Griffith, of course, and to John at the beginning, and to you all for watching. That is our time. I've been Liz from Tortoise, as you know, and we'll be back again this time next Wednesday. As always, put the kettle on, take 5 minutes before you get into your day. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Bye.